Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are focusing on a place many of us, we think we know, Oregon.
Hmm.
You probably picture rain, craft beer, maybe some Portlandia sketches, and just a generally progressive, laid-back vibe.
And that image is certainly part of the story, but it's really just the surface.
Right.
Our source material today reveals a state that is so deeply defined by its own motto, Alice vola proprius, which translates to, she flies with her own wings.
She flies with her own wings.
Yeah, and Oregon has always sought to govern itself, often aggressively separate from national norms, and the result is this place of dramatic, often jarring contradictions.
We're talking about a state whose landscape swings from, coastal rainforest to basically a high desert.
A technical high desert, yes. And a history marred by some of the most stringent racial exclusion laws ever written into a state constitution.
And then at the same time, its economic life is balanced between, the world's largest fungus and the world's largest sports apparel company.
And crucially, it operates under one of the most unusual fiscal policies in America, the kicker tax law, which acts as a sort of constitutional leash on government spending.
So that's our mission today. We want to trace the complex history, explore this unique geography of extremes, and really unpack the economic and political engines that make Oregon one of the most geographically diverse and politically polarized states in the U.S.
We're going deep into the beaver state.
So to set the stage, let's just start with the basics.
Okay. Oregon was admitted as the 33rd state on February 14th, 1859. And as you mentioned, the Beaver State is the nickname, which reflects the fur trade that really defined its early years.
And the capital is Salem, right? The third biggest city.
It is, but Portland it dominates everything. The Portland metro area, which even stretches up into Washington state, is the 26th largest in the entire nation.
And it's huge geographically, too. I think I saw it's the 9th largest state.
9th largest, covering over 98,000 square miles, which, for some perspective, makes it significantly larger than the entire United Kingdom.
Wow. Okay, but before we jump into the deep history, we have to do the necessary public service.
Ah, yes, the pronunciation.
You have to get it right. There is a specific, locally preferred way to say it.
Absolutely. The rule, famously popularized by former Oregon Ducks quarterback Joey Harrington, is mandatory if you want to avoid the outsider label.
It's Oregon, never Oregon.
Never Oregon. It's a key piece of identity, a small but really important sign that the locals fly with their own wings, even when it comes to vowels.
Okay, let's unpack the state's name itself, because the story of Oregon is anything but clear.
It's remarkably uncertain, especially for a state admitted relatively late into the Union. And the competing theories, they span centuries and languages, and they really illustrate the complexity of those early European encounters.
The difficulty is that the name just started showing up on maps before anyone really knew what it meant, right?
Exactly. It appeared in print before anyone could definitively prove its connection to any specific geographic or, linguistic route.
So what are the competing theories? Let's start with the Spanish. What do the sources suggest there?
Okay, so the Spanish were the earliest European claimants to the Pacific coast. And one theory points to a 1598 Spanish chronicle, which referred to the area near the Columbia River as Orajon.
Wait, Orajon means big year in Spanish, doesn't it? That's a very strange name for a region.
It is. It's an intensely bizarre name. And the idea is that this initial designation, El Orajon, was somehow corrupted over time, maybe through transcription errors, shifting that J sound to a G, which led to Oregon.
That one seems like a stretch.
It's pretty humorous, but yeah, not widely accepted. Other Spanish theories are a bit more benign. Maybe it referenced a stream in Spain called Arroyo del Oregon, or possibly the plant oregano that grows in the southern part of the state.
Okay, so maybe not Spanish. What about the earliest English appearance?
The word first showed up in English documents in 1765. Major Robert Rogers petitioned the King of Great Britain for a land grant, and he used the spelling Oregon to refer to this great but still mythical river of the West.
A mythical river.
A mythical river. And that spelling shifted to Oregon by 1778 after Captain James Cook explored the coast.
And the French theory is all about the region's infamous weather, isn't it?
Precisely. The French word Oregon means windstorm or hurricane.
Ah.
And the theory is that French explorers or traders heard Native American accounts of these ferocious Chinook winds that just whip through the lower Columbia River Gorge and decided, yeah, the name fits the stormy, rugged environment.
And finally, we have what is supposedly the most widely accepted, if a little anticlimactic theory.
This is the likely winner, yeah. It was proposed by George R. Stewart in 1944, and it all comes down to an engraver's typo on an 18th century French map.
A typo.
A typo. Stewart suggested that the name started when the Wisconsin, which we now know as the Wisconsin River, was mistakenly spelled Wararaconsint.
So the engraver just broke the word in the wrong place.
That's the idea. They might have broken the name across two lines, making it look like a large western river named Waracon existed. And this typo was then adopted by Major Rogers for his petition.
So whether it was a mythical river, a hurricane, or just a simple cartographic mistake, the name stuck.
It stuck. But long before any European speculation, this land was shaped by geological forces of incredible magnitude and was home to complex civilizations.
The land itself has a deep, dramatic history.
It really does. We have evidence of human habitation dating back at least 15,000 years. Archaeological sites like Fort Rock Cave and the Paisley Caves, they contain material dating as far back as 13,200 years.
And these early settlements were concentrated around the Columbia River, right?
Mostly, yeah, around the plentiful resources of the Columbia and the coastal estuaries.
But the geological drama is, I mean, it's literally the reason most Oregonians live where they do today. We have to talk about the massive Missoula floods.
This is absolutely critical to understanding Western Oregon's identity. During the last glacial period, enormous ice dams formed, creating this vast, ancient Lake Missoula in Montana.
And when these dams collapsed,
When they collapsed, and this happened repeatedly over thousands of years, it unleashed these catastrophic floods. We're talking about torrents of water and ice moving faster than anything imaginable today.
and what did that do to the Willamette Valley?
The Willamette Valley, which is today the densely populated heart of Oregon, was just inundated. It was filled with 300 to 400 feet of water.
Wow.
But the crucial result wasn't destruction, it was creation. These floods deposited layers and layers of nutrient-rich sediment, known as Missoula flood silt, all throughout the valley.
So that's the source of the valley's famous fertility.
That is the source. It supports everything from the massive agriculture to the thriving wine industry we'll get into later.
So by the time European contact began in earnest, starting with Spanish explorers in the mid-16th century, the region was home to dozens of sophisticated indigenous nations.
Absolutely. The Chinook, the Klamath, the Nez Perce, the Umatilla, and so many others, they were already managing the resources of the Columbia and its tributaries.
And then the 18th century brought the major players.
Captain James Cook explored the coast in 1778, but the real race for the territory began in the 19th century after the Louisiana Purchase pushed American interests west.
And that journey often starts with Lewis and Clark.
Yes. They arrived in 1805, searching for the Northwest Passage and establishing American claims. They built Fort Clatsop near the mouth of the Columbia River and endured that famous miserable winter from 1805 to 1806.
Shortly after that, in 1811, John Jacob Astor financed Fort Astoria.
Which established the first permanent English-speaking settlement west of the Rockies.
But the English presence was initially the dominant one, wasn't it? Especially through the powerful Hudson's Bay Company.
Oh, absolutely. Following the War of 1812, the British essentially took over Astor's posts. The Treaty of 1818 then established a joint British and American occupancy.
And the Hudson's Bay Company, the HBC, they ran everything from Fort Vancouver.
They did. From their headquarters there, built in 1825, the HBC exerted massive control over the entire Pacific Northwest.
And their goal was to keep the area as wilderness for the fur trade, right? They actively discouraged settlement.
They did, for a while, until around 1841. The HBC governor, Sir George Simpson, he realized the American pressure was just becoming overwhelming.
So he changed tactics.
In a pretty desperate attempt to solidify the British claim to the Columbia District, he reversed policy and encouraged some Red River colony settlers to relocate near Fort Vancouver. But it was too little, too late.
Because at that point, the Oregon Trail had become the main artery for American migration.
It was a massive wave. Starting in earnest around 1842, 1843, thousands of American settlers just flooded into the Willamette Valley, drawn by the promise of free, fertile land.
And that influx just made the joint occupation unsustainable.
Exactly. The tension was peacefully dissolved in 1846 with the Oregon Treaty, which set the border at the 49th parallel and formalized the territory's status as American land.
The settlement then accelerated rapidly, especially after the Donation Land Claim Act of 1850, which, well, it essentially gave away indigenous land to white settlers.
It did. But this influx and the resulting political development coincided with one of the most difficult parts of Oregon's history. the foundational role of Black exclusion.
This is a crucial element that has to be fully understood
Yeah.
because it so profoundly contradicts the modern image of Oregon.
Right. When Oregon was being settled and moving towards statehood, it wasn't just dealing with the national slavery debate. It was ensuring that even if it were free, it would remain explicitly and legally white.
And the first Black exclusion law was passed in December 1844, when Oregon was still just a provisional government. Lay out the details of this law for us, because they are truly shocking.
The 1844 law simultaneously banned slavery and prohibited African Americans from entering the territory at all.
At all.
At all. And if a Black person refused to leave, the consequences were written directly into law. They would face arrest and public physical punishment.
This was the famous Lash Law.
Yes, the lash law, as it was known. They would receive no less than 20 and no more than 39 lashes or stripes on the back.
And this could be repeated.
Repeatable every 6 months until the individual decided to leave the territory. It was institutionalized state violence aimed at driving out an entire race.
They later removed the public whipping part, but the intent was still there.
The whipping clause was removed due to public distaste, but yes, the intent of exclusion remained firm.
And this context is so vital for understanding the delay in statehood. Arguments just raged in Congress over whether it should be admitted as a free or a slave state.
The irony is staggering. Oregon eventually entered as a free state in 1859, but only because Southern politicians struck a deal to open the possibility of slavery in the southwestern U.S.
So in return for securing this free status, Oregon's original constitution, which its own citizens voted to approve, contained a definitive whites-only clause.
A free state founded not on some abolitionist principle, but on white exclusion.
What did that clause explicitly forbid?
Section 35 of the 1857 Constitution, which became law upon statehood, stated, and I'm quoting here, "No free Negro or mulatto not residing in this state at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall ever come, reside, or be within this state."
It goes on, right?
It does. Or hold any real estate, or make any contracts, or maintain any suit therein. It was a complete legal ban on future Black settlement, designed to create a haven for white farmers and laborers who didn't want to compete with Black workers, free or enslaved.
It's a deep, dark stain. A foundational paradox where the state motto of self-determination, "she flies with her own wings," meant independence only for the white majority.
And that clause wasn't fully repealed until 1926. Even then, only due to popular vote pressure.
The legacy of this exclusion is visible even today, isn't it? For decades, Black populations in Oregon were just tiny compared to neighboring states like California or Washington.
It profoundly shaped the demographic profile we see now, and it's just a necessary counterpoint to the state's current progressive image.
So, the political landscape was forged in this fire of independence and exclusion. But what about the physical land? How did this incredibly varied geography isolate certain regions and maybe reinforce some of those early cultural and political divides?
The geography is a masterclass in extremes, and it absolutely dictates the political divide. Oregon is the 9th largest state, stretching nearly 400 miles east to west.
That east-west distance tells you a lot about the challenges of communication and governance.
Exactly. The landscape ranges from these lush, temperate rainforests in the Coast Range to high desert in the southeast. And that southeast region, by the way, it still meets the historical and technical definition of a frontier.
And the mean elevation is pretty high, too.
3,300 feet, emphasizing the mountainous nature of the interior.
What about its position relative to the rest of the country? There's a fun fact about that.
There is a fascinating detail. Oregon's geographical center is further west than any of the other 48 contiguous states. It is physically and culturally tethered to the Pacific Ocean.
Geologically speaking, Western Oregon sits on a ticking clock, doesn't it?
It does. The mountains of Western Oregon, including the formidable Cascade Range home to Mount Hood, the state's highest peak at over 11,000 feet, were formed by the subduction of the Juan de Fuca Plate under the North American Plate.
And that process is still happening.
Still happening, and it generates significant seismic and volcanic risk. The Cascadia subduction zone is a geological reality that Oregonians have to live with.
It's a chilling reminder. I mean, the entire western flank of the state sits on this ticking geological clock.
It really does. The last time the Cascadia Fault truly spoke was in 1700. It was an earthquake so massive it created a tsunami that traveled all the way to Japan.
And modern planning is finally starting to account for this, right?
Increasingly, yes. Modern land use planning in the Willamette Valley is now forced to account for the possibility of a magnitude 9.0 plus earthquake, a risk that was largely ignored for decades in the name of development.
The Columbia River is another immense force in this geography. It acts as both a natural boundary and an economic lifeline.
It defines so much of the northern border, and it's one of only two major rivers, the Klamath in the south being the other, that manages to cut completely through the formidable Cascade Mountains.
And beyond being the conduit for those ancient Missoula floods, it's also a huge source of power.
Massive hydroelectric power, thanks to structures like the Bonneville Dam. It's been the source of civilization, trade, and now electricity.
Okay, before we delve further into the living landscape, we have to cover Oregon's quirky record holders. They range from the incredibly deep to the impossibly small.
Let's start with the deepest natural feature. Crater Lake, located in Oregon's only national park. It's an intensely blue caldera that holds the record for the deepest lake in the U.S. at 1,943 feet.
Formed by the collapse of a volcano, Mount Mazama.
About 7,700 years ago, yeah. Then you go to the other extreme, the smallest. Portland, the supposed urban center of quirkiness, is home to the world's smallest park.
Mill Ends Park.
Mill Ends Park. Officially recognized by Guinness World Records, it measures a minuscule 452 square inches.
And it started as what, a hole in the ground?
A hole for a light pole that never got filled. A journalist eventually appropriated it as a tiny park for leprechauns. It's peak Portland.
And we have to mention the Dee River, which is locked in this rivalry.
Yes. Oregon claims the Dee River is the shortest river in the world. It flows just 120 feet from Devil's Lake to the Pacific Ocean in Lincoln City.
But Montana disputes this.
Montana disputes this with their Roe River. It's a very literal and often amusing measurement competition that just encapsulates the state's competitive spirit.
All right, let's shift to the living wonders, the flora and fauna, and maybe the most surprising fact about life in Oregon. The world's single largest known organism resides there.
This connects directly to that theme of profound subterranean forces. About 60% of the state is forested, and that number rises to 80% west of the Cascades.
With the Douglas fir, the state tree, being dominant.
Right, which fuels the massive timber industry. But let's talk about the fungus.
Tell us about the fungus.
We're talking about Armillaria ostoya, a fungus commonly known as the honey mushroom. It lives beneath the soil in the Malheur National Forest in eastern Oregon.
And this is not just a collection of mushrooms. It's one single organism.
One contiguous, massive life form. This single organism spans an astonishing 2,200 acres.
2,200 acres.
It's the single largest organism by area, globally. It's mostly underground, this vast network of fungal filaments feeding on tree roots. I think it's a brilliant metaphor for Oregon's identity. A massive, slow-moving, deeply complex, and fiercely independent life force residing mostly beneath the surface.
That's a powerful way to frame it, that slow, independent spirit. And the state is still the top timber producer of the lower 48, even after a massive shift in environmental policy.
That's a testament to the sheer scale of the forests. Despite a 90% drop in timber harvest from federal lands between 1989 and 2011, driven by conservation policies, Oregon still leads the U.S. in softwood lumber production.
What about the wildlife? We hear about beavers, obviously, but also some interesting recent returnees.
The American beaver is the state mammal, of course, and Oregon is home to cougars and elk. But the return of gray wolves is a major story.
They were completely gone from the state for a while.
Extirpated around 1930. But they have returned primarily to the remote northeast region, and their presence creates significant friction with ranchers, which again just highlights that tension between the rural and the urban progressive interests in the state.
Finally, before we transition, let's talk climate. There's this paradox of mild winters but cool summers.
Western Oregon enjoys an oceanic climate, heavily influenced by the Pacific, so you get wet winters and dry summers. And despite being quite far north, the winters are far milder than places at similar latitudes, like the upper Midwest.
It feels warmer than it should.
It does. It feels similar to coastal Western Europe. But the paradox is the summer. Oregon ranks 5th for coolest average summer temperatures of any U.S. state. It rarely gets truly hot near the coast or in the valley.
Meanwhile, Eastern Oregon is a completely different world.
Completely different. Cold, snowy winters and very dry summers. It's a semi-arid or arid steppe climate, much like the Great Basin. Only the Blue Mountains receive enough moisture to support extensive forests.
And speaking of traveling east, there's that fascinating administrative quirk about the time zone.
Right. While most of the state is in the Pacific time zone, which suits its coastal identity, most of Malheur County, down in the far southeast corner bordering Idaho, operates in the Mountain time zone,
Just another small but telling example of the state's regional divisions.
defying easy boundaries. Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears now and discuss where Oregonians actually live and how the massive demographic changes over the last 50 years have altered the state's sociocultural landscape.
The clustering of the population is extraordinary. The Willamette Valley is the undisputed heart of Oregon life. It runs from Eugene in the south through Corvallis and Salem all the way up to the Portland metro area.
And this is that ribbon of fertility we talked about, thanks to those ancient floods.
It is, and it's where the overwhelming majority of Oregonians, around 60%, reside.
We mentioned Astoria as the first permanent settlement, but Oregon City played the earliest political role.
It did. Oregon City was the destination point for the Oregon Trail. It became the Oregon Territory's first incorporated city and served as the first territorial capital from 1848 until the move to Salem in 1852.
So these early cities really established the dominance of the Willamette Valley.
They did, but new centers of growth are emerging rapidly, particularly in the high desert. Bend, located near the geographical center of the state, is frequently ranked as one of the 10 fastest-growing metro areas in the entire U.S.
What's driving that growth?
Tourism, outdoor recreation, and its appeal as a remote work destination. And in eastern Oregon, Hermiston is growing quickly, powered by agriculture and distribution logistics. It provides a necessary counterbalance to the West's dominance.
And people are just flocking to Oregon in general.
They are. The state experienced high in-migration, being named the nation's top moving destination back in 2014. And this sustained influx of people is the engine behind the massive demographic shifts we're about to see.
Let's focus on those demographic shifts, particularly against the backdrop of Oregon's early history of explicit racial exclusion. The numbers show a state that is fundamentally changing its face.
The transformation is profound, especially when you consider that whites-only clause. In 1970, the non-Hispanic white population stood at 95.8% of the total.
Almost entirely white.
Almost entirely. By the 2020 census, that figure had dropped dramatically to 71.7%. That is a monumental diversification in just 5 decades.
Moving Oregon away from that monochromatic ideal it was founded on.
Exactly. And the new diversity is visible across the board. The Hispanic or Latino population now makes up nearly 14% of the population. The foreign-born population is also highly diverse, originating mainly from Latin America and Asia.
Who are the largest groups?
The top 5 countries of origin for immigrants are Mexico, Vietnam, China, India, and the Philippines, reflecting modern global migration patterns.
And the state is home to some distinct and historically isolated communities, too.
Yes. There's a substantial Roma community concentrated in the Willamette Valley and Portland areas. And perhaps most uniquely, Oregon is home to the largest community of Russian Old Believers found anywhere in the U.S.
They settled there in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yes, and they've maintained a very distinct cultural and religious identity.
This brings us to that famous cultural contradiction of modern Oregon, the title of least religious state.
This is often misunderstood. Oregon is frequently cited, sometimes tied with Vermont, as the state with the lowest percentage of religious communities. Surveys have repeatedly shown that Oregon has one of the highest percentages of residents identifying as non-religious, around 24%.
So a quarter of the population explicitly claims no religious affiliation, which reflects a strong secular, intellectual, and sort of anti-establishment culture.
Exactly. This high secularism is a defining characteristic, particularly in the urban centers. However, we have to remember that the numerical majority among those who do affiliate with a religion remains Christian, primarily Roman Catholic.
So the state isn't atheist. It's just unusually non-affiliated and resistant to organized religion compared to the rest of the country.
Precisely. It suggests a culture where individuals are highly comfortable forging their own moral and ethical paths, which, if you loop back to the motto, "She flies with her own wings," it makes perfect sense. It's an independent, skeptical streak applied to faith.
And that independence feeds directly into the political and economic landscape, which is where Oregon truly defies norms.
This is where we get into the really unique stuff.
Now we move into the economic and political realm, where Oregon's identity as a place that flies with its own wings dictates these truly unique fiscal anomalies and groundbreaking legislation.
The economy is built on a duality. You have traditional resource extraction on one hand and cutting-edge technology on the other.
And that agriculture is still immensely strong thanks to the Missoula floods.
It is. Oregon produces 95% of domestic U.S. hazelnuts, a near monopoly, and it ranks third among U.S. states and wineries, benefiting from the perfect microclimates in the valley.
And we can't forget the resource foundation of timber and hydroelectric power.
Hydroelectric power, especially from the Bonneville Dam, provides cheap, reliable power. And even though federal harvests are down, Oregon still leads the U.S. in softwood lumber production. That industry is still a vital economic and cultural force, especially outside the Willamette Valley.
But the modern economic engine is the Silicon Forest.
Oh, absolutely. This started in the 1970s with high-tech manufacturing led by companies like Tektronix. But the true driver today is Intel.
The state's largest private employer.
Largest for-profit private employer, yes. They operate 4 massive facilities, primarily in Hillsborough, employing over 22,000 people. Those campuses essentially form an economy unto themselves.
And this tech dependency is tied directly back to Oregon's 2 major assets we discussed: cheap power and a cool climate.
You see this in the proliferation of data centers. Tech giants like Google in the Dalles and Facebook near Prineville have established these huge data centers in eastern Oregon.
To leverage the cheap hydropower and the naturally cooler climate?
Right. It significantly reduces the massive costs required for cooling server farms.
And the state is headquarters to some corporate behemoth.
Nike. The world headquarters is near Beaverton. It's the state's largest public corporation and a Fortune 500 company. Their sheer global scale provides Oregon with enormous brand recognition.
And Adidas is there too.
Adidas bases its American headquarters in Portland. The fact that the 2 largest global rivals in athletic wear are headquartered in the same state is another one of those remarkable economic quirks.
Okay, let's pivot from corporate giants to the fiscal anomalies that govern how the state pays for itself. It all starts with the glaring absence of a sales tax.
Oregon is famously one of only 5 states in the nation with no statewide sales tax, and this isn't an accident, it's an act of choice. Voters have rejected proposals to enact a sales tax 9 times.
The last time was in 1993, and it was by a huge margin.
A whopping 3-to-1 margin. The opposition is just deeply entrenched in the state's culture of independence and distrust of government.
So because the state can't rely on sales tax revenue, that burden shifts heavily to property taxes and, critically, personal income tax.
Right. And as a result, Oregon has one of the highest personal income tax rates in the nation, the 5th highest, in fact. It's a very deliberate trade-off the citizenry has chosen.
High income tax in exchange for tax-free consumption.
Exactly. And the state's need for revenue leads to these truly specific measures, like the bicycle tax.
A classic Oregonian solution.
They are the only state in the country with a $15 excise tax on new bicycles costing over $200. It's a targeted tax aimed at the state's massive cycling culture.
But the defining fiscal anomaly, the one that governs nearly all spending and budgeting, is the kicker law. We need to explain this clearly.
The kicker is a constitutional mechanism enshrined in the state constitution since 2000, though its roots go back to 1979. It is essentially a constitutional anti-tax insurance policy for the citizens.
So lay out the mechanics for us. How does it work?
The law mandates that if the state government's income tax collections exceed the official revenue estimates made by state economists by 2% or more during a 2-year budget cycle,
And what happened?
then the entire excess amount, 100% of it, must be refunded directly to the taxpayers.
So if the government makes a planning error and takes in too much money, it doesn't get to keep it for a rainy day fund or spend it on new services. It has to treat that over as like a mistake and give it all back.
Precisely. It's a profound limitation on state spending. It forces the legislature to be incredibly conservative in its estimates. And since 1979, refunds have been triggered and issued for 7 of the 11 biennia.
So it happens pretty often.
It does. The kicker represents a deep institutionalized distrust of centralized government spending. It's maybe the clearest expression of she flies with her own wings when it comes to money.
And that drive for direct citizen input is also the foundation of Oregon's long history of progressive governance and these landmark social experiments.
That history begins with the Oregon system. In 1902, Oregon became the first state to adopt direct legislation through initiatives and referendums.
This allows citizens to just bypass the legislature entirely, right?
They can propose or approve laws or constitutional amendments directly on the ballot, and this system has produced truly revolutionary policy shifts.
like pioneering vote by mail.
Absolutely. Oregon pioneered the American use of postal voting, mandating it for all counties in 1998. It's still one of only two states where voting by mail is the sole method.
And famously, in 1994, using that direct democracy mechanism, Oregon became the first U.S. state to legalize physician-assisted suicide.
Through the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, yes. And more recently, Oregon took on one of the most controversial social issues of our time, drug decriminalization.
This was in 2020 with Measure 110.
Right. Through that ballot measure, Oregon became the first state to decriminalize the possession of small quantities of street drugs like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. The intent was to treat addiction as a public health issue rather than a criminal one.
But this policy was recently reversed, which highlights the complexity of this kind of direct democracy and self-experimentation.
It was. After 3 years, the initiative was widely criticized as a mixed success. Drug overdose deaths continued to rise sharply, and critics argued the treatment system just wasn't adequately built out to handle the demand.
So in 2024, the legislature stepped in.
Responding to intense pushback from law enforcement and city officials, they reversed the decriminalization component, so possession became criminalized again.
But they kept the public health focus.
They did. The state heavily expanded funding for treatment services, maintaining the public health focus of the original measure, but now using criminal penalties as a kind of leverage.
It was a very quick and significant course correction.
It shows that while Oregon is willing to lead with these radical social experiments, it's also willing to course correct quickly when the data proves challenging.
And they also pioneered psychedelics around the same time.
Also a 2020 ballot measure. They approved creating a legal framework for the therapeutic administration of psilocybin.
Okay, before we leave governance, there's one final incredible constitutional quirk about the executive branch.
Ah, yes. Oregon is the only state in the entire nation that does not have a mechanism to impeach executive office holders, including the governor.
No impeachment. So how do you remove a governor?
It requires a recall election. This structural limitation means political accountability is handled through popular vote, not legislative action.
And all of this complex, independent policy happens within an intensely polarized political climate, entirely split by that geographical line we discussed.
Yeah.
The Cascade Range.
The split is visceral. The Willamette Valley urban centers, Portland, Eugene, Corvallis, Salem, are overwhelmingly liberal. They form the foundation of Oregon's progressive policy reputation.
And the other side?
The eastern two-thirds of the state, the high desert and mountain regions, are staunchly conservative and vote reliably Republican.
And the data confirms this isn't just anecdotal.
A 2008 analysis found Oregon to be the most politically polarized state in the country. It boasts both most liberal Democratic voters and, conversely, the most conservative Republican voters nationally.
So statewide elections are often decided by the sheer population density in that narrow corridor of the Willamette Valley.
That's right. And a recent development has expanded Oregon's federal political power, too. Following the 2020 census, Oregon gained a 6th congressional seat due to population growth,
Which increases its total electoral college votes to 8.
for the 2024 election and onward, yes. This increased national influence only intensifies the pressure points between the state's urban and rural populations.
We've covered geology, history, policy, and politics. Now let's wrap up with a quick look at Oregon's cultural footprint through sports, film, and global connections.
Oregon is rapidly becoming a major professional sports hub. For decades, the NBA's Portland Trail Blazers were the only major team famous for their 1977 championship.
But now soccer's huge.
Soccer reigns supreme in terms of sheer fan enthusiasm. The atmosphere at Providence Park for a soccer match is legendary.
The state hosts the Portland Timbers of the MLS and the Portland Thorns FC of the NWSL.
And the Thorns are cultural icons in the city. They're 3-time champions, and they consistently lead the entire NWSL in attendance, often drawing massive, passionate crowds that rival men's professional teams.
And the future of professional sports in Oregon is female, with a new WNBA team on the horizon.
Yes, the Portland Fire are set to begin play in 2026, further cementing Portland's reputation as a high-engagement sports market.
And beyond the pros, the collegiate rivalry between the Oregon State Beavers and the University of Oregon Ducks is a massive cultural event.
Especially in the Pac-12 conference, which dominates local attention. And Oregon has served as a stunning location for film shoots, thanks to that geographical diversity we spent so much time on.
The coast, the valley, the high desert, it offers everything.
Classic examples include The Goonies, which defines the Astoria coast for so many people, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This legacy is preserved at the Oregon Film Museum in Astoria.
And of course, the state claims a piece of global pop culture through native son Matt Groening.
Who incorporated so many references from his hometown of Portland into the enduring universe of The Simpsons.
Finally, let's just touch on Oregon's global reach, reflected in its international sister region partnerships. They aren't just partnering with predictable neighbors.
That's where the detail is fascinating. Oregon has relationships with major trading partners like Fujian Province in China, Toyama Prefecture in Japan, and South Jeolla Province in South Korea.
But the most unexpected connection is with Iraqi Kurdistan.
It is, and a partnership like that tells us a lot about modern Oregon's global priorities. That specific partnership was established to foster educational and medical exchanges,
So it suggests Oregon's independent spirit is also applied to international outreach.
focusing on unique diplomatic and trade connections outside of the typical federal framework.
What a journey! From ancient flooded valleys and complex naming mysteries, through the profound paradox of a free state founded on exclusion laws, to this modern economy powered by Nike, Intel, and local hazelnuts.
It's a state that is constantly governing itself through unique legislation, like the $15 bike tax, the Death with Dignity Act, and that defining constitutional leash on government known as the kicker.
Oregon truly operates on its own terms, often deliberately separate from national norms, whether in its tax structure or its social policies.
It is defined by its extremes.
And that leads us to our final thought for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. We've seen that motto, "She flies with her own wings," reflected most clearly in the Oregon system of direct democracy.
Right. Citizens are constantly intervening directly through initiatives and referendums, legislating everything from pump your own gas rules to the very nature of healthcare with the Oregon Health Plan and the complex, rapid evolution of drug policy.
So the question is, how does this deep inherent drive for self-determination and direct control define the state's ongoing, often turbulent evolution?
Does this constant reliance on the popular will, expressed through ballot boxes and constitutional quirks like the kicker law, create a more resilient, responsive, and innovative civic life? Or does it simply guarantee perpetual, intense polarization between its highly concentrated urban centers and its vast conservative frontier?
It's the central tension of the state, and one we will certainly continue watching. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.